From silence and frost, the spirit of a people began to breathe.
Within stillness, thought took its first trembling form. And from the mist, awareness rose like a shadow of the earth.
From that dawn, light touched memory too, awakening the forest within man. In flowing water, the soul of the land found its reflection. Symbols became bridges the pall between silence and the shaping of meaning. Thought mirrored nature thunes, calm above, depth below.
Strength grew downward first, before it dared to rise.
Humanity gathered, bound by breath, flame, and fear.
The forest began to speak in the language of tribes.
From each step, belonging grew like roots through time. Water carried stories before words were born.
Shelter was the first thought. To endure is to belong. Creation began in silence, the Rad, and patience became wisdom.
Life watched life lined, each reflection another, thought forming. Even endings carried the warmth of memory.
The world began to hear itself.
In the still water, eternity blinked for a moment. Every spark a question, every glow a beginning.
Stone remembered what voices forgot. Even the storm was part of the song. Time coiled inward, dreaming itself into history. Memory burned its shape into stone and story. Above the mist, thought found its sky.
The fall itself was not lost to fate, but transformation.
In darkness, they dreamed, and dreaming became destiny.
From that shimmer, time would one day awaken. Thus began the long meditation wenchings, the soul of Germany stirring in silence. From the silence of forests, tribes gathered beneath the same wind. Unity began, not in peace, but in the rhythm of survival. Sound itself became identity, the cry of iron meeting destiny. Between these waters, the spirit of Germania found its name. To lead was not to command, but to remember the fire within men. Even the beasts carried the echo of defiance. They sought wisdom in age, not power, in memory, not conquest.
Each heartbeat became a hymn to the land.
To them, Earth was both mother and promise. Fire became their scripture, written in breath and flame.
Hardship was their teacher, and endurance their only faith.
Across waters, tribes learned to move like shadows between storms. Creation began where necessity met courage.
Even tenderness was armored in vigilance.
Symbols rose as memory's guardians gunned, half beast, half prayer. In shadow and flame, they built their unseen temples.
Fate spoke through the small things.
Light was both judgment and mercy, the first law of the sky.
From dawn to dusk, every path was sacred.
Even in struggle, joy survived to slate. Quiet, defiant, human. Beneath the canopy, freedom was their oldest inheritance.
Death was familiar the bond, yet never final. Storms became the chorus of their courage. The air itself became their ally. The forest was not backdrop, it pawned. It was destiny. Legends perched too, watching centuries unfold beneath their wings. To lose was to learn the pain. To rebuild was to remember. In resistance, they found the rhythm of eternity. The land drank their pain, Ontui, and gave back resilience. Even in darkness, the spirit refused to sleep. Beyond the trees, another world marched closer.
Empire sought to tame what could not be owned.
Here, the wilderness became a weapon.
One man's defiance became the whisper of a nation unborn. The forest devoured empire and returned silence. History's first victory here was not written, Hyalan. It was remembered. Out of loss and triumph, identity began to take shape.
Even ashes held the warmth of defiance.
Peace returned not in triumph, but in breath.
The conqueror's symbol became the land's memory.
Time forged culture as flame forges steel. Work became worship to Kemp. Creation, the true prayer.
Music carried their longing across centuries.
Joy returned to Sen, fragile yet eternal. Home became their quiet victory. Readiness endured to none. Peace was never certain. The wanderers carried their homeland within. The spirit of movement became the spirit of Germany. Every voyage was both exile and return. And through it all, they remained bound to the earth. Labor became lineage, every furrow a memory. Freedom was the only border they obeyed. Even in calm, the land whispered of coming storms.
To plan was to dream, they. To fight was to become.
The land itself seemed forged of iron and fire. Movement was their memory, unending, eternal. Yet beneath that silence, history still breathed. The flame endured and triumphed, small, human, unyielding. From wilderness to will, the soul had found its shape. Memory remained May, carved deeper than conquest could reach. From struggle came stillness, fear. From freedom, identity. The river still remembers the courage of its children.
And so, thought began to look beyond the horizon.
The ancient world was ending, yet its echoes would guide the next. Thus closed the age of tribes of lives, and opened the age of faith. From the ashes of tribes, faith lifted its quiet towers.
Sound became prayer, Adil Khan. Vibration became hope.
Belief sought form, carving spirit into stone. In silence, words began to hold eternity. Knowledge became faith's twin, quiet, precise, enduring.
The monastery Skesov, a world apart, yet pulsing with unseen life.
In each flame, humanity sought its reflection in heaven.
Music carried devotion where language could not.
Light itself became the first scripture. Stone reached for God Kai, and humanity learned structure.
Heave, sister, heave, ho! Faith gave rhythm to labor and meaning to stone.
From destruction came design, and from design, enfun, endurance.
Even chaos found harmony in the reach for heaven. Power bent its knee to faith Oteth, if only for a moment. Law was born from promise, sacred and fragile alike. Beyond borders, one vision, an empire sanctified by order. To fight was to serve. To serve was to believe.
Glory wore humility as its crown.
Ceremony replaced chaos, Lord. Rhythm became rule. The empire wrote itself into memory.
Trade followed trust, the quiet architecture of civilization.
Communion lived beyond the altar.
This symbol represents our connection.
Learning became the new liturgy.
The city itself began to pray.
Order spread not by sword, but by pattern.
Even darkness had its discipline.
Curiosity was faith's secret companion.
To read was to pray with the eyes. Knowledge glittered like stained glass, being fragile, eternal.
Stillness became the measure of the divine.
Even flame must surrender Verfela, yet faith endures beyond it.
Stone and sound became the language of heaven. Rituals carried the weight of centuries.
Honor sought forgiveness before battle.
Between faith and fire, humanity stood trembling yet whole. The road itself became their redemption.
Every step repeated the rhythm of belief.
Silence spoke where words would have failed.
Suffering turned to meaning. Pain became prayer. Vision itself was sanctified.
Power returned, now clothed in reverence.
Faith argued with itself, seeking purity through conflict.
For a moment, the world bowed as one.
Light conquered shadow, the Tiem, if only for a breath.
Yet beyond faith's comfort, destiny still waited in the dark.
Time moved again Niskerli, and questions began to stir.
Doubt whispered softly, the seed of new reason.
Heaven was measured, and awe took on form. Words escaped the monastery Astauri into the world's hunger. Knowledge no longer knelt. The medieval world held its breath. Change begins not in thunder, Bayard, but in quiet fire.
Thought turned inward, and faith began to question itself.
Tradition trembled before truth.
The age of order was giving way to the age of reason.
Silence returned, not as absence, but as preparation.
Thought was about to rise again, this time unbound.
One world ends quietly, the next begins to breathe. Faith had built the heights, and now reason would climb them. The medieval light dimmed, but its glow endured.
History pauses, waiting for the mind to awaken. Thought was now air, invisible, unstoppable.
Illumination was no longer divine, acquired. It was human.
Within the quiet, the future waited to be written.
Thus ended the age of faith, Beherd, and dawned the age of reason.
Thought paused to Zlig, the breath before revolution. From darkness of script came the dawn of conscience. Faith met reason terrain, and the whisper became defiance. Truth no longer asked permission to be spoken. Ideas travel faster than armies.
The age of hand became the age of mind.
Each page carried a fragment of freedom.
The voice of one became the voice of all.
Faith cracked open, not to destroy, but to breathe.
Knowledge multiplied like fire, impossible to contain.
The world itself became scripture, to be read anew.
Language returned to the people. Faith found its human voice.
Every press was a pulse of awakening.
Thought began to travel farther than empire.
Doubt became devotion to truth.
The heavens were no longer feared. They were understood.
Light and thought walked together now. Order revealed itself pound, divine through geometry.
Learning became wonder, shaped by reason.
Knowledge turned sacred again, Quell, this time by its freedom.
Thought had left the cloister and entered the world.
Life and learning began to share the same rhythm.
A new light rose, gentle, questioning, infinite.
Knowledge flowed outward, found, boundless, luminous.
The German mind began to see beyond nation, toward thought itself.
The cosmos turned inward barely, and consciousness became its mirror.
The revolution now wrote itself in silence.
Every drop of wax, a moment of enlightenment.
Thus reason was born, Krivy, not to replace faith, but to illuminate it. From thought came fire. From fire, the making of a nation. Industry became the heartbeat of destiny. Labor turned into hymn, fuming, rhythm of creation and pride.
The age of machines forged its own poetry of motion.
Lines of steel connected what faith once divided.
Discipline replaced devotion. Order reborn as ambition.
A symbol once silent began to roar.
One mind would turn iron and will into unity.
Borders bent beneath the gravity of purpose.
Alliances whispered what history would later shout.
Iron replaced prayer as Europe held its breath. War returned beats, but now with reason's precision. The air itself became a witness to unity's price.
From chaos, order assembled its crown.
Even in war, the heavens burned with purpose. Words sealed what swords had declared.
Every signature carried the echo of sacrifice. Victory was cold, FN, but alive.
Fate had chosen a palace for a nation's birth.
Reflection met ambition, honed, and empire was crowned.
1,000 years of longing condensed into a single gesture.
The old faith and the new will found their chorus.
The empire breathed ivory, not of incense, but of iron.
Germany had found its mirror in unity.
A symbol now complete, Q, both beginning and burden.
Faith and fire learned to coexist.
The land transformed into motion. Creation no longer belonged to kings alone. Thought itself began to travel at the speed of light. The future arrived, loud and unstoppable.
Even architects of destiny feared the weight of their design.
The builder fades. The machine continues.
Power now had no shore. Empire dreamed of oceans and distant suns.
Pride return!
Celebration burned hotter than understanding.
Industry became empire's pulse errand. Relentless, alive.
Every hand held history.
Speed became the new faith. Innocence watched progress without knowing its cost.
Words now
wrestled with the power they once served.
The public mind awoke, loud and restless.
Freedom widened. Not by war, but by will.
Thought now spoke through wire and lens. The century turned bright and fragile.
Pride became armor, both shining and blind.
Beneath progress, shadows gathered. Ambition reached beyond land paled toward the empire of sea.
The empire saw itself eternal in marble and metal. Yet every sunset carries prophecy.
Unity, now, feet in step with preparation!
Innocence learned to live among iron.
Destiny redrew itself with trembling certainty.
History stirred once more, often, restless in its armor.
The empire stood tall, unaware of its own height. Industry became the empire's starlight. The age of glory hummed like machinery, endless, uneasy.
Even in empire, the soul still searched for meaning.
Greatness was no longer a man. It was a system. Storms, once born in faith, now gathered in pride.
No one yet knew the train was already moving toward tragedy.
Progress and peril shared the same breath. Hope and hubris were twins of the same light. Power stood alone to shine, and silence followed. The century held its breath before the fall. The machinery of progress no longer knew its purpose. Unity had become obedience. The ground trembled, not from war yet, but from memory. Faith began to sound like warning. Thus ended the age of empire and began the age of survival.
Triumph had become tradition, repeated until it lost its meaning.
Art still tried to speak day, but thunder spoke louder.
Messages crossed nations, but hearts drifted apart.
Words once sacred now prepared the stage for war.
Power stared at its reflection and saw no end.
Celebration echoed louder than caution.
Destiny moved on schedule, unstoppable and blind.
Every thread carried the weight of coming sorrow.
Even marble shuddered before the storm. The dream of empire dissolved, leaving only its shadow. The century awakened beneath the weight of war. Humanity vanished into uniforms and orders. Even innocence had nowhere left to run. Every explosion rewrote the stars.
Words became prayers that never reached home.
Heaven wept anger, yet the earth kept consuming.
Compassion survived play. Quiet, unseen, eternal.
Healing became rebellion against despair.
Life refused extinction.
Silence became the only victory left.
Memory too heavy to carry hay, too sacred to loose.
The land remembered every name.
Faith endured in fracture.
The war reached home, and no one was spared. Movement, once noble, became necessity. Peace came quietly, carrying no triumph. Pride folded itself into grief. The rhythm of survival returned Akendo. Slow, fragile, human.
Hope learned to live among ashes.
A new struggle began, invisible but relentless.
Value vanished a scrubble, yet dignity fought to remain.
Art became survival's last language.
Even joy carried the scent of forgetting.
Expression replaced certainty.
Desperation mistook fury for faith.
Fear had learned to disguise itself as unity.
Thought itself was placed on trial.
History repeated, Annie. Louder, darker.
Innocence became the first casualty once more. The world entered its shadow. Empire returned, reborn in terror. Duty began blindness.
Humanity marched beside its own destruction.
The sky itself betrayed them.
Faith refused to fall, even when everything else did.
Winter came as both punishment and mercy.
Compassion outlasted victory.
Truth survived underground. Love became the only shield left. The future waited, silent, unspoken.
Judgment fell not from heaven, but from engines.
The world itself seemed to scream.
Memory was the last homeland.
Beauty and sorrow burned together. After fire, even silence became sacred. Survival replaced victory.
Surrender was not defeat. Vain. It was awakening.
The end of war was not peace made, only movement.
Even prayer paused, unsure of whom to address.
Names lost glow, yet presence eternal.
Power collapsed back into dust. Conquerors entered not as heroes, but as witnesses.
The act of rebuilding began with hands, not orders.
Beauty returned quietly, fragile but unstoppable.
Learning rose again, soft as dawn.
Music was rebirth's first breath.
Light forgave what history could not.
Voices replaced flags, fragile but true. One nation became two hearts. Both sides built, both sides hoped.
Separation became a landscape.
Peace now required distance.
Love learned patience across concrete.
Dreams ignored boundaries.
Even control carried fatigue.
Freedom found new colors, loud, uncertain.
Art crossed walls where politics could not. Separation glistened like sorrow, disguised as order. The century trembled, weary yet unbroken.
The war had ended, but survival continued. Memory lingered, where voices had vanished.
Hope returned as art made of dust.
Nature began the rebuilding before men did.
The act of growth was defiance itself.
Faith whispered, humbled, but unbroken.
Survival became the new equality.
The rhythm of life cautiously resumed.
Connection became redemption.
Knowledge returned shyly, like morning after storm.
Trust had to be rebuilt, one note at a time.
Joy re-entered through the smallest doors.
Beauty returned without permission.
The ordinary became extraordinary once again.
Two worlds, one heartbeat.
Even division glowed beneath the same sky.
Connection found its way through noise.
Separation turned into reflection.
The soul was split, but not broken.
Even divided, the song remained one. Thus ended the age of war, Avelvan, and began the long breath of peace.
From the ruins, a quiet pulse began again.
Rebuilding became the truest prayer.
The city learned to breathe through transparency.
Fresh wind carried forgiveness through every room.
Knowledge or retro returned, not as burden, but as promise.
Power, once forged in fire, turned clean and quiet.
Beauty no longer sought to escape enduring, but to belong.
Unity returned, this time built from within.
Separation began to melt beneath shared tears.
Hope moved hand to hand before it moved mountains.
Light reclaimed the darkness, brick by brick. Freedom began as a sound. Deep, small, certed, unstoppable.
Barriers fell not by force, but by joy.
Night turned into dawn, division into dance.
The heart of Europe began to beat in gold and glass.
Separation became story as story became strength.
A generation born from memory, yet dreaming forward.
Power returned this time, transparent, shared, humane.
History now walked in circles of light, not shadow.
Freedom had learned to sound like music.
Sound healed what silence had broken.
Memory was no longer a wound,
but a teacher. Art became the nation's language of forgiveness.
The rhythm of peace returned, vibrant and ordinary.
The river flowed again to us, this time unbroken.
Once divided, Germany now stood at the center, in Liflitz, not to rule, but to unite.
Strength became dialogue. Power became partnership.
The dream of Europe had found its voice.
Diversity replaced division, the new empire of empathy.
Music once again became Germany's language to the world.
Thought returned to daily life Crow. Soft, human, infinite.
Wonder replaced fear as their inheritance.
Light itself had become industry's redemption.
Progress learned quietness again.
The future was built leaf by leaf.
The city became its own reflection live. Memory made luminous.
Culture returned as both mirror and flame.
Once symbol of power, Wondekildi, now symbol of peace.
Europe gathered not for empire, but for harmony.
From ashes to light, Germany became reflection of the continent itself. Division was now only memory of motion. The world had grown smaller, simply, yet hearts wider.
Remembrance turned to dialogue, not blame.
The past now spoke through light, not shadow. Forgiveness walked hand in hand with grief. Expression replaced monument Aish, the living over the eternal. Sound became architecture, and architecture became breath.
Harmony was no longer a dream, Melly. It was lived.
Germany stood renewed, offense, humble, luminous, aware. Memory transformed into light, drifting free.
Lessons now began, where wars had ended.
The rhythm of labor became the song of renewal. Nature forgave before men did.
Thought lived again, calm, tender, infinite.
The city dreamed awake.
The present learned to hold the past gently.
Every structure a memory, every light a vow.
Morning had returned for good.
The heart of Europe now beat not in conquest, but in compassion.
Prosperity returned full, but this time tempered by memory.
Modernity and tradition finally shared the same horizon.
Energy no longer meant conquest, but continuity. Knowledge had become inheritance, peaceful, collective, eternal. Curiosity rose again, now bound to wonder, not power.
Connection, the truest architecture of peace.
Harmony had found its home in humanity itself.
Unity no longer needed lines, a new, only understanding. Light crowned the city once again, this time without empire.
Thus the nation stood renewed, whole, heart open, spirit free, woven into Europe's dawn.
Every dawn carries the memory of what endured.
Peace speaks quietly, to a fourth. It does not need to be heard to be known. Life returns in ordinary grace, haftlev, unseen, eternal.
The future begins in the quiet act of seeing.
Transparency became the new monument.
Connection outlived every division.
The sacred remained, not in walls, but in memory.
Nature, patient as ever, remembers without judgment.
Light endures because hearts choose to keep it.
Within reflection, the infinite finds form.
Past and present no longer oppose and vie, they converse.
Motion became peace supreme, the quiet courage of continuity. The ancient woods still breathe beneath the cities. Freedom needs no banner, only breath.
Every life leaves circles that never end.
History is light, bending, breaking, and still returning. The land itself is scripture hand-written, written in stone and dawn. Symbols once heavy with empire, now shine with peace.
Perspective itself became redemption.
Beyond borders, the same light touches all summits. The future has forgiven the past. To remember is not to mourn, Elio. It is to understand. The story of a nation became the song of endurance. Time itself bows before the persistence of light.
From tribe to thought, from darkness to dawn, the spirit remained. The soul of Germany flows galantic, silent, radiant, alive.
Empires fade, but the spirit of Germany still endures.